Steve Montador's life story is both inspiring and heartbreaking, underscoring the physical and emotional toll of professional hockey and the unseen dangers that athletes carry within them. Born on December 21, 1979, in Vancouver, British Columbia, Montador was an energetic, curious child who immersed himself in the local Canadian tradition of pond hockey. He was never the most gifted player from a technical standpoint, but few could match his perseverance, grit, and willingness to play through pain. Those characteristics became the bedrock of a career that defied expectations and took him to the pinnacle of the NHL. Yet they also planted the seeds of a silent struggle that would haunt him long after the cheers of the crowd had faded. Growing up in Greater Vancouver, Montador played youth hockey with the same fervor as many Canadian children. Early on, coaches praised his work ethic, even when his raw skills lagged behind his peers. He wasn't a prolific goal scorer or a dazzling skater, but he made up for any shortcomings by throwing himself into every drill as though it were Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals. Teammates found him endearingly determined. If there was a puck battle in the corner, Montador was the one to fight for possession, no questions asked. In a sport that idolizes toughness, that never-quit attitude usually counts for a lot. And so it did for the young defender who climbed through the junior ranks of the Ontario Hockey League, OHL, despite going undrafted in the NHL entry draft. He simply refused to let obstacles dictate his path. By the late 1990s, Montador had found a spot in the OHL, suiting up for the North Bay Centennials and later the Erie Otters. His approach to the game didn't change. Block shots, protect teammates, finish checks, sacrifice your body. Such attributes made him a favorite among coaches who wanted reliable defenders that would do the dirty work. Still, the road to an NHL contract is never guaranteed, especially for an undrafted player. Scouts looked at Montador's average size, around 6 feet, and questioned his upside at the professional level. But one of his biggest strengths was the ability to adapt. He worked tirelessly off the ice, improving his conditioning and his skating. Even though he couldn't rival the speed of an elite puck-moving defenseman, he learned to read the play effectively, break up passes, and deliver the outlet pass to a forward in stride. He grew into a steady presence on the blue line, the type of role player who might just catch the eye of an NHL team willing to give him a chance. That chance materialized in 2000 when the Calgary Flames organization recognized his value and signed him as a free agent. Montador began his professional career with the St. John Flames in the American Hockey League, AHL, honing his skills and learning to keep up with older, more seasoned competitors. AHL hockey is unforgiving, often dominated by players fighting tooth and nail for a shot in the NHL. Montador thrived in that environment, melding his trademark grit with a growing sense of poise. By the 2001-2 season, the Calgary Flames had decided to give him a look at the NHL level, calling him up for a handful of games. He faced the usual rookie jitters, struggling at times to keep pace with the league's fastest forwards, but he also displayed flashes of the fearless style that had carried him so far. The Flames kept him in the system, confident that with more seasoning, he could evolve into a dependable defender or a depth player who could fill multiple roles. The breakthrough moment came during the 2003-4 season. Montador split time between the NHL and the AHL that year, but was on the Flames roster for their improbable run to the Stanley Cup Final. Though Calgary fell just short of capturing the Cup, losing in 7 games to the Tampa Bay Lightning, the experience was transformative. Montador became a folk hero of sorts, a representative of the underdog spirit that had propelled the Flames through the Western Conference. He wasn't a marquee star like Jarome Iginla, but coaches and fans alike recognized his willingness to sacrifice his body with every blocked shot, every punishing check, every scrum in front of the net. That postseason run helped solidify Montador's status as a legitimate NHLer. He might never top the scoring charts, but he would always be that reliable, fearless presence teams desire in their bottom defensive pairing. Following that Stanley Cup Final run, Montador moved around the league, suiting up for several teams: the Florida Panthers, Anaheim Ducks, Boston Bruins, Buffalo Sabres, and ultimately the Chicago Blackhawks. He wasn't a flashy addition wherever he went, but coaches respected him as a stay-at-home defenseman who could also play some shifts at forward in a pinch. One of those utility players who might not get big minutes but often plugs crucial gaps. Yet the repeated hits, the collisions along the boards, and the fights he engaged in to protect teammates were accumulating. Montador had always accepted pain as part of the job, but as the seasons wore on, the hits began to take a toll more significant than he realized. Concussions were an especially dangerous pitfall, haunting many of the league's toughest players. From the outside, it looked like Montador was merely dealing with the normal bumps and bruises of an NHL career. Inside, a storm was brewing, one that had profound consequences. Like many players in that era, Montador tried to hide or downplay his injuries. The culture of hockey often discouraged players from acknowledging concussion symptoms. A warrior was someone who shook off a head injury, got stitched up if necessary, and returned to the ice in the next period. Admitting to headaches, dizziness, or depression could be seen as weakness, something that might cause a coach to question a player's commitment or readiness for battle. Montador fell neatly into this mold. He would go home after games nursing throbbing headaches, lingering fogginess, and sometimes bouts of confusion. Occasionally, he'd miss a game or two under the vague label of upper body injury. Then he'd be back. The fans would cheer his resilience, never knowing that, behind the scenes, Montador's struggle was growing more acute by the day. Things worsened once he joined the Chicago Blackhawks in 2011. Early in the 2011-12 season, he sustained multiple blows to the head, forcing him out of the lineup. Recovery seemed slow, and he couldn't shake the debilitating symptoms that had begun to dominate his everyday life. Anxiety and depression started creeping in, and Montador found it hard to focus, to sleep, or even to maintain the sense of identity that had anchored him. Teammates recall him becoming withdrawn, sometimes missing from locker room activities. To compound matters, he was trying to stay on the roster of a team that had won the Stanley Cup in 2010 and was poised to contend again. The pressure to perform weighed heavily on him. He wanted to prove he could still fulfill a vital role on a championship-caliber defense. The Blackhawks organization, for their part, tried to balance the push for competitiveness with a need to address Montador's injuries. Yet the reality was that no one had a concrete formula for how to rehabilitate repeated concussions. By 2012-13, Montador's place in the NHL was slipping away. As head injuries forced him to miss large chunks of time, his contract eventually got bought out by Chicago, leaving him without a stable position. In the final stretch of his career, he briefly played in the American Hockey League, hoping to show that he could still handle the rigors of professional hockey. But the repeated head trauma had fractured more than just his on-ice potential. It had begun to undermine his sense of self and mental well-being. He was diagnosed with post-concussion syndrome, a condition that can manifest in mood swings, crippling headaches, memory loss, and disorientation. These symptoms made life away from hockey difficult. Daily tasks became Herculean challenges, and the competitive fire that once fueled him turned into an almost desperate search for equilibrium. During this tumultuous period, Montador's personal life reflected his growing instability. Friends noticed he was becoming more reclusive, unable to maintain routines or simple responsibilities. He tried to keep a positive front, occasionally speaking to reporters about aiming for a comeback. But he never could fully mask the anxiety and despair that clouded his future. Some days, he sought therapy or visited specialists who recommended extended rest, medication, or cognitive exercises to manage the symptoms. Other days, he'd drop by a local rink, trying to recapture the sense of normalcy he felt when he was simply gliding across the ice. It was a heartbreaking cycle, defined by fleeting hopes of recovery, and the crushing reality that the game he loved might have damaged him irreparably. The broader context was the NHL's growing concussion crisis. High-profile stories involving the deaths of enforcers like Derek Boogaard and Rick Rypien, players who had grappled with depression and head injuries, were casting a harsh spotlight on the league's handling of concussions. Lawsuits began to emerge, with former players alleging that the NHL had failed to protect them or educate them properly on the risks of repeated head trauma. Montador was caught in this wave of scrutiny, though he never fully embraced a public role as an advocate while he was alive. He was simply trying to get through each day. He struggled financially and emotionally, unsure of how to plan for the future when even short-term stability was elusive. Sometimes he confided in close friends or family about his fears. What if he could never escape the headaches? What if his personality changes were permanent? On February 15, 2015, tragedy struck. Montador was found dead in his Mississauga, Ontario, home at just 35 years old. News of his passing sent a jolt through the hockey community, stirring echoes of the heartbreak that had accompanied previous player deaths tied to mental health struggles and potential head trauma complications. Initial reports indicated that he'd died in his sleep, though details emerged later, suggesting that he was dealing with both substance use and significant post-concussion syndrome symptoms. The autopsy would ultimately reveal chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, in his brain, the degenerative condition that has been linked to repeated head injuries in contact sports. Montador, once the embodiment of a determined, fearless NHL defenseman, had become yet another cautionary tale of the hidden dangers hockey players faced behind the scenes. His death left friends and family in shock, grappling with a barrage of questions. Could more have been done to prevent this? Had Montador received the right kind of care and support from the NHL or the Players Association? How many concussions had he sustained in his career? And had he ever been adequately informed of the risk that each successive one might accumulate into lasting neurological damage? Lawsuits pertaining to player head injuries mention his name as evidence of the league's obligations to better protect and guide its athletes. Teammates expressed sorrow and regret, recalling how Montador always put others first and seldom revealed the depth of his own suffering. Some pointed out the cruel irony of a role player who had given everything on the ice, only to be left fighting a silent, losing battle with his own mind. In the months following his passing, Montador's family became vocal about the need for reform. His father, for instance, spoke openly about the moments that led up to Steve's death and how the personality changes and memory lapses had become so glaring. They questioned the culture of silence around concussions, pointing out that players often felt pressure to return to the lineup prematurely, while coaches and trainers, constrained by competitive demands, sometimes glossed over the severity of head injuries. The Montador family's outspokenness placed them in the growing chorus of advocates calling for better concussion protocols, more substantial mental health resources, and a fundamental shift in how hockey organizations handle player safety. Simultaneously, the conversation around hockey and head trauma broadened. Medical research advanced, highlighting the link between repeated concussions and a host of cognitive and mood-related issues, from early-onset dementia to debilitating depression. Players from different eras began coming forward with their own horror stories of confusion, sleeplessness, and suicidal thoughts linked to repeated brain injuries. Montador's name came up frequently in these discussions, a poignant reminder that the cost of ignoring concussions can be immeasurably high. While the NHL introduced new concussion protocols and spotters to remove players from games if a head injury is suspected, critics argued these measures were insufficient or inconsistently enforced. They pointed to Montador's death as evidence that more needs to be done at a systemic level, including longer recovery times, thorough post-career support, and an end to the culture that glorifies toughing it out at any cost. Years later, Montador's story still resonates with current players who are more attuned to concussion symptoms and more likely to speak up when they feel something is wrong. Yet cultural changes come slowly. Younger players might learn from tragedies like his, but the older guard, steeped in a tradition that regards pain as a badge of honor, sometimes resents the increased caution around injuries. Meanwhile, scientists keep uncovering further links between repeated subconcussive hits, the kind that happen all the time in a high-contact sport like hockey, and the onset of CTE. Montador himself rarely took center stage in the highlight reels, but his memory serves as a persistent, cautionary reminder that the toll of the game can be both invisible and deadly. Perhaps the greatest tragedy is that Montador's final years were spent wrestling with questions he couldn't fully articulate. At times, he must have felt that his identity as a hard-nosed player had betrayed him. The same qualities that made him a valued teammate, the readiness to block a 90-mile-per-hour slapshot with his body, the willingness to push himself through countless collisions, had also left him with a brain that turned against him. In hockey circles, the phrase "secret struggle" captures the loneliness of that fight, especially in a sport where the team's success often overshadows individual well-being. He wore a shield and helmet every night, but none of that could protect him from the slow, insidious damage unfolding within. Steve Montador's story lives on not only as a heartbreaking example of what can go wrong, but as a rallying cry for change. the NHL has been forced to confront the wave of retiree lawsuits, to tweak rules around hits to the head, and to fund medical research. But families like Montador's want more than marginal improvements. They want a transformative shift that places player health above all else. They envision a future where a young defenseman who's rattled by a hard hit can speak openly about symptoms without fearing ostracism or losing his spot on the roster. They hope that mental health care, long neglected in the world of professional sports, becomes integral to how teams operate. As fans look back on Montador's career, they see a player who embodied resilience, who overcame the odds by forging an NHL path despite not being drafted. He was never the star, never the focus of intense media hype, yet he earned respect through his effort, humility, and devotion to the team. Those who played with him recall that he approached each game with a quiet determination, supporting teammates on and off the ice. Even if the stats, over 500 games played, around 33 goals, and fewer than 150 total points, don't jump off the page, the intangible qualities he brought were immense. They just came with a cost that no one wanted to fully acknowledge at the time. His loss at age 35 left a void that can't be measured in numbers. The heartbreak extends beyond the rink, into the hearts of family, friends, and fans who wish they had been more aware of his anguish. Countless tributes poured in, speaking to his kindness, his generosity, and his unwavering spirit. And in the years since, many have come to view Montador as a martyr of sorts, someone who loved the game wholeheartedly, but was let down by the broader system that failed to safeguard him from repeated brain injuries. If there is a silver lining, it might be that stories like his have catalyzed a slow but real cultural shift in hockey, prompting discussions about everything from full facial protection to the elimination of hits targeting the head. In the end, Montador's secret struggle reveals the fragility behind a tough exterior. Hockey demands bravery, skill, and the willingness to endure physical punishment. But it's also a sport prone to glorifying stoicism and punishing vulnerability. Montador played as though each shift was his last. Dive in front of the puck, take the body, finish your check. He used to say he simply wanted to leave it all on the ice. Tragically, he did. And by the time the final buzzer sounded on his career, the damage done to his mind and spirit was profound. Those who remember him don't only recall the courageous shot blocks and the timely defensive plays. They recall a man who, deep down, bore an invisible weight that grew heavier with each collision. For future generations of players, Montador's life and death serve as both a warning and a call for empathy. The hockey community can still celebrate the tenacity that defines the sport without ignoring the cost of repeated head trauma. There's room for big hits, passionate play, and spirited competition, but there must also be space for compassion, honesty, and medical vigilance. If there is a lasting lesson in Montador's legacy, it's that the bravest act might be asking for help, and that the game's enduring allure should never come at the expense of a player's long-term well-being. He might be gone, but his story continues to push hockey toward a new era, one in which the secrets players carry are brought into the light before it's too late.